We continue now at the top of Daf Kuftes Vavam and Beis and Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 115b. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing the opinion of Rav Chilkiah. Rav Chilkiah says when you have a carbon asham that's mechusar zman, it means it's not the proper time to actually bring that carbon asham. But if one were to offer that carbon asham outside of the Beis Hamikdash shelo lishmo, meaning not as a carbon asham, so then there would be liability because an asham shelo lishmo is kosher. And the chiddush really of Rav Chilkiah is, even though in general we know that an asham shelo lishmo is kosher, but here you have a situation where the asham, it's mechusar zman. Lishmo, it would not be kosher. And so there's an argument to be made that if it's not kosher lishmo in those situations like mechusar zman, it would not be accepted shelo lishmo. But Rav Chilkiah is saying that's not the case. Shelo lishmo by asham is accepted essentially across the board, even in a situation where it is mechusar zman, and therefore there is liability if it's offered outside the Beis HaMikdash, again shelo lishmo. And the Gemara in the previous summit had asked a question on Rav Huna from a brisa, and Rav Huna said that there is one scenario where he admits that shelo lishmo actually there would be liability, and that is a situation where the person actually designated two animals just in case one got lost. So in that situation, already from the outset, that second animal really is sort of designated as a karbonola if it's not going to be used, if the owner already got kapara from the first animal. And the Gemara now continues and says, Kid Rav Huna Amar Rav, it's like Rav Huna said that Rav said. The Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav, because Rav Huna said that Rav said, Asham shenitik l're'iyah v'shachtu stam kosher li'ol. If you have an asham that was left to graze, again, it was designated to graze to develop a blemish, and then it was slaughtered. Usually it develops a blemish, you sell it, you use the money for an ola in the summertime on the Mizbeach, but let's say it was slaughtered stam, it is kosher as an ola. Rashi explains, Kidrafuna Marav, shenitik l're'iyah, shenitik midin hakrava, meaning it's now designated away from being offered, umisaru l'roa achi yistoiv, and you're giving it over to the shepherd till it develops a blemish. The kaim alon, because we've established kol shebechatos mesa ba'asham roa. The general halach is if by a carbon chatas it would be left to die, by a carbon asham it's left to graze and develop a blemish. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Hamala mibsar chatas, somebody who offers up from the meat of a carbon chatas. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught in the Brisa, Minayin lamala mibsar chatas, or mibsar asham. From where do we know that if somebody offers up, this is talking about outside of the Beis HaMikdash, offers from the meat of a chatas, the meat of an asham, these are generally eaten. They're not offered up on the Mizbeach. Umibsar kachei kachim, and from the meat of kachei kachim, umibsar kachim kalim, and from the meat of kachim kalim, umimoser ha'omer, and from the remainder of the omer after the fistful was taken, ushtei halechem, and the shtei halechem, v'lechem aponim, and the lechem aponim, ushyarim menachos, and the remainder of karban mincha. In all of these cases, shepater, how do we know exempt in all of these cases? Talmud lomar ola, the pasuk says the word ola, ma ola shi ru'uya lahala, just like ola, it has to be something that's fit for being offered up. Only over there, if it's something that's going to be offered up on the Mizbeach, then if it's offered outside the Beis HaMikdash, there's a liability. Afkol shi ru'uya lahala. So too, again, it only applies to cases where it's fit to be offered up. Minayin shaf hayotzek v'habolol, from where do we know even one who pours the oil in the karban mincha, or mixes it in the karban mincha, v'haposes, or crumbles the karban mincha, v'hamoleach, and one who salts it, v'hamenif, and waves it, v'hamagish, and brings it close, v'hamesader hashulchan, and who arranges the table, v'hameteves haneros, and cleans out the ashes of the neros of the menorah, v'hakometz, and one who takes a fistful, v'hamekabel b'chutz, and one who receives outside of the Beis HaMikdash. The Shinui Nuschos has v'hamekabel damim b'chutz, receives blood outside of the Beis HaMikdash. In all of these cases, shapater, how do we know in all of these cases that the person is exempt for offering it up outside of the Beis HaMikdash? There's no liability in these cases. Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says, Asher yala ola o zevach, it says, he offers up an ola or zevach, maha Allah, she gamar avoda, just like offering it up on the Mizbech is the conclusion, the completion of the avoda, afkol shu gamar avoda, so too the liability outside of the Beis HaMikdash is only by gamar avoda, by the completion of the avoda. Rashi explains ola, it says in the pasuk ola, asher yala ola, that's the pasuk. Gemara avoda, it has to be Gemara avoda, she'ena acharei avoda. It means it has to be that there's no avoda that follows that avoda. V'israbu luhu be'afkol kagon hamenasech u'maktir ketores u'maktir kemotzim u'maktir minchas kohanim. The afkol is an inclusion at the end of the brisa. We seem to be including other cases which are Gemara avoda. Rashi gives examples. For example, pouring libations, burning the ketores, burning the komets, and burning the minchas kohanim. Those would be included. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Ad shelo hukam hamishkan, before the Mishkan was put up, bamos, private altars, were permitted, and also the avoda was done by the bechoros, by the firstborns. And the Gemara says, Yosef Rav Huna bar Rav Katina, Rav Huna bar Rav Katina, he sat, Kami de Rav Chisda, he sat before Rav Chisda, Chisda v'kakari, and he read the pasuk Vayeshalach es nari b'nei Yisrael, which talks about the avoda of the Bechoros. Amar Lei said back to him, Hachi Amar Ravasi, this is what Ravasi says, that Karvu pasku, that they brought, but then they stopped. It was only at this time, this one incident, that the Bechoros served. And the Gemara says, Savar la'osvei mimas nisan. So he thought to ask on Rav Chisda from the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that they continued to serve all the way until the Mishkan was put up. But then Shamei dekamar mishmei de Rav Ada Barava, he heard him say, in the name of Rav Ada Barava, he heard Rav Chisda say another statement that was difficult. Rav Chisda said, Ola sheikrivu Yisrael ba'midbar, that when Klal Yisrael offered a carbon oil in the midbar, eina tu'una hefshet v'nituach, it did not require flaying and to be cut up, it was just burned in its entirety. And so when he heard now two statements of Rav Chisda that were difficult, Osvei Braisa de She'ave Bekulu, he asked him from a Braisa, he was able to ask on both statements of Rav Chisda from the following Braisa. Had he asked from the Mishnah, he would only be able to ask on that first statement of Rav Chisda. Now he could ask on both. The Tanya, as we learned in a Braisa, Ad Shelo Hukam HaMishkan Habamos Mutaros, it says before the Mishkan was put up, the Bamos were mutter. V'avoda bebechoros, and the avoda was with the bechoros, just like our Mishnah says. V'hakol ksherin lahakre behema chayev yov zechar menekevos tmimenu balei mumen tahorin, and everybody is allowed to bring for karbanos behema chay and oaf, domesticated, undomesticated animals and birds, male, female, whether they are blemished or not, as long as they're tahorin, as long as they're pure. Avalot tamein, but not if they're impure. V'hakol karvu olos, all could bring olos, v'ola sheikrivu Yisrael ba'midbar, and the ola, the Klal Yisrael brought in the midbar tu'una havshet v'nituach. It says explicitly in this brisa, it required flaying and had to be cut up. V'nachrim bizman hazeh rashayin lasos kain, and non-Jews nowadays, they are allowed to offer up on bamos, on private altars. And in any case here, we have a question against Rav Chisda on both counts in terms of whether hefshet v'nituach is required and in terms of whether the Bechoros did the avoda all the way until the Mishkan was put up. And the Gemara says, in terms of the contradiction of when the Bechoros served, Tanoihi, that's a machlokas Tanoim, the Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, V'gam ha-kohanim hanigoshim el Hashem yiskadoshu, it says that the Kohanim, they were sanctified. Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha Omer, zu precious Bechoros. Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha says, this refers to the separation, the designation of the Bechoros, and so therefore you see the Bechoros did serve. Rabbi Omer, Rabbi says, zu precious Nadav Yaviu, this is a reference to the separation of Nadav and Avihu. And the Gemara says, B'shalom l'man damar zu precious Nadav Yaviu, I understand if this is referring to the separation of Nadav and Avihu, hainu dichsiv hu asher diber Hashem lemor bekrovai HaKadosh. That would explain the pasuk that Hashem had said earlier that those who are close to me, when Nadav and Avihu died, it says that Hashem had said earlier that with those who are close to me, I will be sanctified. So that would be a reference to this pasuk that said Yiskadoshu in terms of Nadav and Avihu. El l'man damar zu precious bechoros, but according to the one who says it refers to the precious bechoros, to the service of the bechoros. So heichoremiza. So where is their hint to the idea of Nadav and Avihu? And the Gemara says to that, as it's written in the pasuk, V'no'arati shamal of Yisrael v'nikdash b'chvodi. It says sanctified in my honor. Al tikri b'chvodi ela b'mechubadai. It means b'mechubadai. It's a reference to those who honor me. It's a reference to Nadav and Avihu. Davar zeh amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'Moshe. Now this statement was made by Hashem to Moshe. V'lo yadu, and they didn't know what it meant. Ad shemesu b'nei Aaron, until the b'nei Aaron died, when Nadav and Avihu died. Kevan shemesu b'nei Aaron, when Nadav and Avihu died. Amar lo Aaron, achi lo mesu banecha ela lahakdish Moshe al HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then Moshe Rabbeinu said, Aaron, my brother, your sons died only to sanctify the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Kevan sheyada Aaron shebonav yidui makom hein, when Aaron understood that his sons were beloved by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, shasak, he was silent, vekivel schar, and he received reward for that. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, vayidom Aaron, that Aaron was silent. V'chein b'David u'omer dom la'Hashem v'eschololo. It also says this idea of silence by David HaMelech, that it means afa pisha mapelo chalolim chalolim, even though many corpses fall, at shetok, you should be silent. V'chein b'Shlomo u'omer, it says the same thing by Shlomo, eis lachshos v'eis ladaber, a time to be silent, a time to speak. Pa'amim sheshosek u'mekabel schar lashtika, sometimes a person is silent and gets reward for the silence. Pa'amim medaber u'mekabel schar ladibor, sometimes a person speaks and gets reward for speaking. V'hainu dam Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Rabbi Yochanan, that's what Rabbi Chia bar Abba says, that Rabbi Yochanan says, Ma'idich siv nora l'ukim mi miktashecha, it says mi mikdashecha, from your holy places, is the awe of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Al tikri mi mikdashecha ella mi mekudashecha, means mi mekudashecha, from your holy individuals. B'shah she'osa HaKadosh Baruch Hu din b'kedoshav, and the pasuk means when HaKadosh Baruch Hu does justice with those who are the holy individuals, misyareyu, misalu, misalel, there's a certain awe and elevation and praise for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Gemara continues, Ela kasha ola, but don't we still have a difficulty in terms of the carbon ola? Was it flayed and cut or not? And the Gemara says to that, Trei Tanohi, that's a machlokus between two Tanoim as follows. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brayser, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Rabbi Shmuel says, Klolos nemru b'Sinai, the general rules were said at Sinai, upratos bo'ol moed, but the specifics were only said later at the Oel Moed, according to Rabbi Shmuel. The specifics of flaying and cutting up the Ola would only have been later. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva says, Klolos upratos nemru b'Sinai, everything was said at Sinai, so it would have been from the outset, the halacha of flaying and cutting. V'nishnu b'Oel Moed, it was then repeated at the Oel Moed, v'nishtalshu b'Arvos Moav, and then it was said a third time at Arvos Moav. And Rashi explains, Amarle Rav Huna hachi amar Ravasi upasku. Rav Huna said, this is what Ravasi says, that they stopped, which means, Oso ayom paska avoda min ha-bechoros. That day, the avoda from the bechoros stopped. Shemi Sinai nitztavu al ha-kahuna. At Sinai, they were commanded in terms of the Kohanim serving, k'di yolef l'kamon, as will be learned later on. V'shimshu nadav v'aviu kolos tashan rishon. According to this, Nadav and Avihu would have served all of that first year, ad shehukam ha-mishkan, until the Mishkan was put up, v'mesu, and they died. They were already in service. And Rashi continues, Ola Shekrivu Yisrael B'Midbar, the Ola that Klal Yisrael offered in the Midbar. Again, that's the Brisa that said, Te'una Hafshet V'Nituach, it needed to be flayed and it needed to be cut. That's Shekrivu Yisrael B'Midbar Sinai Kodem Matan Torah. This is talking about the Ola that they brought before Matan Torah. That's the Pasuk of Aishalach Es Narei, the Pasuk, again, of the Narei B'nai Yisrael. And the Brisa also said, V'Hakol Ksherin Likarev, everything is fit to be offered. K'dim Mefarash V'Yazel, that's like the Brisa goes on to explain, Behema V'Chaya V'Of, it's saying that all the various kinds of animals can be offered. V'hakol karvu olos, and then the statement was made that all can be offered as olos. Hashta mashma, Rashi says right now that's understood to mean shelo hayu makriven ella olos, that they only brought olos. Ulakame parachala, the Gemara is going to ask on this. And then the Brisa said that Nochrim, non-Jews nowadays, are Rashoy and Lasos came, they're allowed to do this, meaning the lo nesru lehen abamos, bamos are not usher for them. And the Gemara then said it's a machlokas tanoim in terms of the bechoros, because the pasuk says v'gam hakohanim hanigoshim el Hashem yiskadoshu. Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha says that it means precious bechoros, and Rebbe says that it means precious nadav yaviu. Rashi explains again. The pasuk says yiskadoshu milalos. Yiskadoshu means that it is holy, and they're not allowed to go up. V'afa pisha regilin lageshes elai ulhalos. Even though in general they're allowed to come close to me and they're allowed to offer up. Hoyed bohen shelo yalu bahar. The pasuk is saying over here, it's warning them not to go up on the mountain. And so zu precious bechoros, the first opinion, as we said, is precious bechoros. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, hizras ha-bechoros lahafresh minahar. It's a warning to the bechoros to stay away from the mountain. That's talking about the firstborn. And the other opinion is zu precious nadav yaviu. It's a warning to nadav and aviu. Kilomar lo nikru bechoros kohanim elamien ha-kohanim hanigoshim shehuzru kan lifrosh minahar zen nadav yaviu. According to this approach, meaning according to the approach of Rebbe, it's not the firstborns that are called Kohanim. That is not the case. Rather, who are the Kohanim that are being warned? It's Nadav and Avihu. Shenasu b'Sinai Kohanim. They became Kohanim at Sinai. V'heina Kohanim hanigoshem el Hashem lahakrav karbanos. They're the Kohanim who are supposed to come close to Hashem to bring karbanos. And so you have a machlokas tanoim here, whether the Bechoros continue to serve or whether this is referring to Nadav and Avihu. And Rashi continues, if it's Nadav and Avihu, Hainu Dichsiv, then it makes sense what's written in the Pasuk, Kishemesu Nadav Avihu, when Nadav and Avihu died, Asher Dibra, that already it was said to them, Kedekamar b'Sinai, it already said in Sinai, there was a warning about this, Pen Yifrotz b'em Hashem, that Hashem is going to strike them, V'keven Shelo Nizaru Lifrosh min HaHeichel, since they were not careful to separate from the Heichel, B'Hakamas HaMishkan, when the Mishkan was put up, Paratz b'hem, so that's why again, they were punished. El Laman Damar Zu Precious Bechoros, Heichel Remiza, but if the Pasuk is talking about separating the Bechoros, so where is there any hint to Nadav and Avihu? Hachi Garcinan, that's the proper text. V'lo Garcinan Precious Nadav Avihu, Heichel Remiza, the proper text is not that the separation of Nadav and Avihu, where is it hinted to? Misas Nadav Avihu, Heichel Ramza L'Moshe Kodem L'chein. It's the death of Nadav and Avihu. Where was it hinted to earlier? Dekamar Hu Asher Diber, because the statement of Moshe is that's what Hashem said. So where was it hinted to? And so to that the Gemara said V'nikdash Bechvodi. It says in the pasuk V'nikdash Bechvodi Nemro Lo L'Moshe B'Yom Shenitztav Al Meleches HaMishkan. This statement was made to Moshe by the commandment of building the Mishkan. V'ramaz lo shebiyom sheyishra shchinasu al habayis, and the hint is that on the day that the Shechina goes on the Beis HaMikdash or on the Mishkan, yiskadash b'chvodav, there will be this sanctification b'chvodav. V'lo nirmaz lahavin mahu ad shemesu, and they didn't understand exactly who that was referring to until Nadav and Avihu died. Ela kedei lehiskadesh kevodo shel makam aleim lahodia shu nora al yireyav umiyudav. The point is to show that he is awesome upon those who fear him and those who are beloved to him. V'zehu asher diber elai b'yom shenitztavesi al hamishkan v'nikdash b'chvodi ba'osam hanichbodim ukrovim li'akadesh. That's what the pasuk means. Those who are close to me, I'm going to be sanctified. Shenemar v'yidom Aaron. It says in the pasuk v'yidom Aaron harei sheshasak v'kibal haschar. You see, he was silent and he accepted that reward. And Rashi continues and notes, Mefarish beVereishis Rabbah, it's explained in Bereishis Rabbah, Shemitoch kach zochem v'nisyachet elav hadibor. Because of this, he had the dibor from HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly, Shenemar acharei moso inyan, Parsha Shasu Yayayin. Right after this, it said to Aharon, the Parsha, about not drinking wine and serving in the Mikdash, V'lo huzkar ba'oso dibor Moshe el Aaron. There only Aaron is mentioned and not Moshe. Nora Elokim mikdashecha, Elokim zu midas hadin. Rashi explains, Elokim is the midah of judgment. Eimasai and when is he held in awe? Al yedeshu osa din b'mekudashav. That's when he makes justice by those who are holy. Ela ola kasha. But then we had a difficulty in terms of ola. Dekatani hacha de teuna hafshid v'netuach. It said over here that it requires being flayed and cut. And to that also is machlokes tanoim klolos nemru b'Sinai. General rules at Sinai could go in mizbach adam matas ali v'zavachta olav. A general rule would be like make a mizbeach v'lo nisparshu hilchas ola shlamim sham, but no details about ola and shlamim. Upratos biol moed, but the specifics at the Ol Moed la'achar shukam HaMishkan Nemra. That was after the Mishkan was put up. Torah's Kohanim l'Moshe. That's when the laws of the Kohanim were said to Moshe. V'sham nisparshu v'hefshed v'nitach. That's when we had all of the explanations, let's say, of hefshed and nituach, the flaying and the cutting. L'Rav Yishmael shamin and do'ola shekriva b'Sinai lo hutano hafshed v'nituach. So you see, according to Rav Yishmael, the ola by Sinai did not require flaying and cutting. Nishtalshu ba'arvos Moav, but they were repeated a third time at Arvos Moav. The Gemara said, Mishnah Torah shechazar Moshe. That's the Mishnah Torah that Moshe went over, repeated the Torah of Yamr Lehem al Seder. He said it over to them in order, like it's written in Parshas Devarim. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, the Brisa said above, Hakol Ksher and Lahakriv, all animals before the Mishkan was put up were fit to be brought and offered to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Gemara says, Menohani Mili, from where do we know this? Amar Rav says the Amar Kor, because the Pasuk says, Vayiven Noach Mizbeach LaHashem. It says Noach built a Mizbeach, Vayikach Mikol HaBehema HaTorah, Umikol Of HaTor. It says he brought from all domesticated animals that were pure and from all birds that were pure, Behema Kimashmo. And the Gemara says Behema, that's as it's understood, domesticated animals, and Chaya B'chlal Behema, wild animals are included in Behema, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Tez Zayin Amud Aleph.